Hey everyone, welcome to Breaking the News Deep Cut Conversations, our interview series that previews our forthcoming documentary podcast, Breaking the News, CNN, and the Birth of Chaos Media. I'm Bill Smee, and I'm joined by my co host and series co producer, John Hashimoto. Hey, John.
Hi, Bill.
And our guest today is Steve Korn, a former longtime senior executive at Turner Broadcasting and CNN. And over the course of his career, Steve has seen firsthand how the media industry has evolved and adapted and how technology has changed the business model, creating challenges for CNN and companies and outlets across the media landscape. Steve, welcome and thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, we'll dive in here. And before we get into the current state of media, love to take you back. I'd love for you to take us back to the early years working for Ted Turner. What was it that made, in your mind, Ted so successful as a cable TV businessman? And what lessons from that era do you think are still relevant today?
Well, I think Ted was a pretty unique person. He was it. He was a visionary. There's no two ways about it. He literally went for a walk in the woods and thought about creating CNN. And not many people have that skill set. I think he was just blessed by the gods with that ability. So I guess if you find visionaries today, I'm sure that they can, in their own ways, create their own businesses. But that's one of the things that Ted brought to the table.
Now, Ted, Steve risked a lot in pursuing this vision. And during those beginning years, it was no certainty it was going to work. In fact, the
Right.
money was being drained to build this thing up.
Yeah.
There were some hairy moments, as we all know, for Ted Turner and the team at CNN. In your mind, when did CNN break through? Not from a journalism standpoint, but from a market business standpoint.
Well, I can identify. There's one event I can identify that I know really turned things around, but it was a slow build. As you know, CNN launched on June 1, 1980. And when it launched, it had 1.7 million subscribers. That was it. By the year 2000, it had 100 million. So there was a steady rise in subscribers and viewership, and therefore advertising revenue as well. But the thing that really exploded CNN from a business standpoint was Gulf 401. And CNN proved its indispensability when that war broke out, and it was the first time that a war was covered as intimately and was as in depth and live ever in history. Prior wars were covered by guys who went out in the field with film, and they had to ship it back, say from Vietnam, and develop the film. And by the time it got on air, it was pretty much, it could be obsolete. CNN was broadcasting live from Iraq, from Kuwait, from everywhere in the Middle East where there were events taking place that we were covering. And it caught the fancy of the world as well. I may have told you guys this story, but later on in the 90s, we owned 50% of a news network in Germany. And I was sat on the board of that news network. And in connection with our operations in Germany, we had to pay a visit to the German Antitrust Authority. And we had our meeting. And after the meeting, the head of the Antitrust Authority in Germany pulled me aside and said, "I want to thank you for CNN, because it was the only way that we knew what was really happening in the war." And I, of course, took total credit for No, but I mean, that had a profound effect on me, because I realized the impact that CNN had not only in the U.S., but certainly around the world.
Right. It's interesting. I think a lot of people, you were intimately involved on the business side of the business, both at Turner and CNN. A lot of people don't really understand how CNN and other cable networks became profitable. Could you, for like a fourth grader, explain how cable fees used to work and how that resulted in a kind of baseline of revenue and profitability that kind of is still with us to some extent?
Yeah, except unfortunately the subscriber fees are way down because the number of subscribers are way down. But it was we were the early cable networks, CNN, ESPN, and some of the other early commercial networks were the beneficiaries of a rising tide lifting all boats. As I mentioned a minute ago, we launched with 1.7 million subscribers. Not a big number and not a number in which you could turn a profit long term. But as the number of subscribers increased, it did two things. One, it increased the per subscriber subscription fee that we charged cable operators. And with a larger audience, we were able to increase our advertising rates and therefore our revenue. So as I recall, the revenue split between subscription fees and advertising was roughly 50-50. So, I mean, it was a great benefit to the company from a business standpoint that the number of subscribers were increasing pretty steadily and pretty dramatically. So in the course of 20 years, went from 1.7 million subs to 100 million subs.
CNN pretty much had the playing field to itself.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed what, about a decade, maybe, or a little less than a decade.
It was more than a decade because we launched in '80, and I think that Fox and MSNBC, you can check me on this, launched about in '96 or so.
That's right. Now, here's the question. What was the feeling by you as a business leader and a finance folks, the people really concerned about horizons?
Mm-hmm.
Was it clear to you that, yeah, these new entrants are going to definitely eat away at our edges or eat away at our market share?
Well, early on, it was clear that they were competition. And we, of course, went from having 100% of the cable news market to having something less than that. We did not envision that Fox in particular would grow as fast as they did and garner the kind of audience that they did, and eventually get better for a long time. Even though they had a better viewership, we had better advertising rates because of our demo. But over time, that went away, and I don't think we appreciated, certainly not on day 1 or day 60 of Fox's existence, that they would grow as fast as they did. But then I don't have to tell you that it became more than just competition. They became the leader in terms of viewership and advertising revenue and profitability. They had an advantage that they were very smart to capitalize on. They recognized that all the people who were listening to right-wing talk radio needed a home on TV, and that's what they gave them. So they had this built-in rock-solid audience of people on the right of the political spectrum, and that was their base, and they used it to great advantage.
It's funny, around that same time, the mid to late '90s, there was another threat or opportunity as well, which is the emergence of the internet and digital technology. CNN was a cable business, TV business. What pressures did that place on CNN, and how do you think in those first years CNN responded?
Well, I think I know we responded quickly, and in creating and financing our online offerings. CNN.com was up and running pretty quickly. So I think under the circumstances, we did a pretty decent job of making sure that we hopped on that train before it ran away. But, the real threat from the digital revolution was that people had so many more choices, and that it was very difficult, still is very difficult, to command the kind of audience that would justify the kinds of advertising rates that we were charging. And then, of course, as the cord cutters came along and the number of subscribers dropped substantially from 100 million to, I'm not sure where it is today, but I know it's substantially less. The rising tide and the double stream of revenue that we profited from the tide started to go back out from the shore. So it changed the world. I mean, it changed our business anyway. And it's still a huge dilemma for CNN. I haven't been at CNN for a long time, but it's a huge dilemma for the company. And CNN will never again, I don't believe, have the kind of audience and the kind of the percentage of the audience that it had, even after Fox and MSNBC came along. There's just too many outlets, too many ways to get news instantaneously.
One question, though, that I always had when I was there sitting in an interactive newsroom was, now I'm thinking back on it, was should CNN have been more aggressive on the digital side in investments or acquisitions that would have put it in a better place today than it is?
Well, the old cliche that hindsight's 2020, and I think it's true here. We were feeling our way and trying to react as quickly as we could, but of course we had a huge investment in the television network or networks, because, as you know, we had several iterations of CNN and headline news and CNN and Espanol. So there was tremendous infrastructure and hunger for resources that those existing networks had. But I think we recognized that early on that we had to be in the digital space. Um, but it was a tough go.
So much was happening at that period. We talked about competition, the emergence of digital in response, or I don't know, but mergers, right?
Mhm.
You were there and had a front row seat, obviously, first with the Time Warner and then the AOL a few years later. I guess question simple is kind of what drove those at the time, and how do you think those impacted CNN specifically?
Well, let me talk to the Time Warner merger, because I was right in the middle of it. Um, and to understand it, you have to understand that 11 years before we merged with Time Warner, we went off and bought MGM
Mhm.
for a very steep price. Although the truth of the matter is that that movie library was worth more to us than it was to anyone else. And Ted recognized that immediately. And it gave us the largest movie library in the world. And with that library, we were not only able to fortify TBS, but we were able to create from scratch TNT, Cartoon Network, Turner Classic Movies. And those networks pretty quickly created an asset value that was far in excess of the cost of the purchase of MGM. However, in order to complete the MGM transaction, we had to borrow a lot of money. And they were fairly onerous terms at the time. So Ted turned to a consortium of large cable operators. And we sold 40% of the equity of the company to that consortium of cable operators. And they had seats on our board. There were things we needed supermajority control that gave them the ability to veto or block things. And so that changed the dynamic. It was no longer Ted's company in the way that it was before. When I first got involved with Ted, he literally owned over 90% of the company. I think it was like 92% of the company. So we were technically a public company, but we were operated like a sole proprietorship. And that changed dramatically when we sold the equity to the cable operators. And what Ted ultimately realized is that we had to grow. And believe it or not, the cable operators, to some extent, didn't want us to grow. I can tell you of a situation where we wanted to buy what was then Financial News Network, and we had a deal for it. And we brought the deal to the board, and they turned it down. And they turned it down, I believe, because they didn't want us to acquire another cable network and increase our leverage against cable operators. And so we didn't complete the deal. NBC did, and it became CNBC. So that I became abundantly clear that Ted was no longer really driving the company, because there were things that they could veto. And he realized that we were the company as a whole, not just CNN, but TBS as a whole, all of the entertainment networks, as well as CNN, needed to grow. And in order to grow, we needed to be in a larger company.
Yeah.
So that's what led to the merger with Time Warner. And I'll tell you that a lot of us always felt that if that happened, the more likely acquirer would have been John Malone's group. Um, because Malone, I think, was very good at playing nice with Ted, and Ted liked him. Time Warner guys in those days were much more hard nosed. But the way that the Time Warner merger came around is that Ted was at his ranch in Montana and got a phone call from Jerry Levin, who said, "Can I come out and see you this weekend?" Didn't tell him why. Jerry flew out and proposed the merger. Ted agreed to it on the spot. And he came back to the office Monday morning, and there were a small group of us who were gathered. And he came in and told us that he had agreed to this and we needed to get the deal done. But one of us asked him, I don't remember who it was, why he chose Time Warner. And he said that he chose Time Warner because he wanted to know that when CNN was gone, the company would be housed in a company that shared our journalistic approach because of Time Inc. Now, as you know, that turned out not to really be the case, and and the Time Inc. magazines were offloaded, and Time Warner was much less a journalism company than the old Time Warner. But that was his reason, or one of his reasons. And he also knew that we needed greater reach and greater resources, not reach. We needed greater resources, and we couldn't do it on our own, both because we were on a relative basis small, and because the cable operators had negative control.
There was also, it seemed, a trend of sort of bigger is better at that point. So
Hmm.
it was just part of a, but I'm just wondering, and again, not to use the 2020 hindsight, but in retrospect, have we maybe learned that bigger isn't always better?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that in this case it is better, um, because it's all about resources. It's all about marketing. And if you don't have the resources to promote your company and be able to continue to do acquisitions and whatnot, you're going to be left behind. So what we've seen now, subsequent to all this, is a great consolidation in the media business. And I'm not necessarily a fan of it. I have a certain level of sadness when I see these companies merging. And I don't think it's necessarily. I know it's not good for journalism, and it's probably not good for the creative community in Hollywood. But that's the way things are going, and I don't know how you stop it. And I don't know what the next iteration after this will be. Maybe it'll be better for journalists and for creative types in Hollywood. I don't know.
Which leads us not to AOL Time Warner merger. We could spend an hour on that, but let's jump right ahead to Paramount. What, as you look at what's happening here, what parallels do you see compared to some of those other acquisitions and mergers? Unfortunately, it's been far more than we can almost count when it comes to the Time Warner asset, I'll call it. Let me frame it also this way. A lot of journalists look at the New York Times and family ownership and go, gosh, we wish Ted, this was a family affair, the Ted affair. So those are a couple different questions. Let me see if that's too many questions. What do you think? What's your thinking about the Paramount deal? And would CNN in particular be better off if it was family owned?
Yes, in answer to your last question, yes, I think so. Um, but it's a tall order for any family because it's still a very expensive operation to keep going. But even with its decreased subscription revenue, CNN is still pretty profitable. Um, but it's still a large business, and you would need a family not only with great wealth but with great staying power and commitment. Um, and I don't know that that exists anywhere for CNN. So CNN is kind of blowing in the wind in terms of these deals, and is not in control of its destiny in any way, shape, or form. And I find that very sad. And I think my sadness is more than just nostalgia for a time when I was younger and involved in a company that was very exciting to be part of. I don't think it's good for America. I don't think that the great consolidation that we're seeing is good for the country. I think we need a diversity of voices. We need multiple outlets for the creative community in Hollywood to have places to distribute their intellectual property. It's it's very funny that people think that CNN has been very liberal, and I guess supposedly I guess in compared to Fox, maybe that's true, but I don't think we ever changed our approach to the news in a way that was anything other than trying to be fair to the facts. But now you have an acquirer who appears to have a political agenda, and I think that that is not a good thing for CNN. Maybe they'll surprise us and they'll give it relative autonomy and let the chips fall where they may in terms of news coverage. But uh, I'm a pessimist by nature.
In the face of all the changes in our media world, um, is it possible to have a successful global news network in a direct-to-consumer streaming world and digital world, you think, Steve? Or is CNN going to have to shrink given the new realities?
Great question. To be honest, I'm not sure I know the answer. I would hope that CNN would not have to shrink, that it still has a great brand and a high recognition. So I do think that it might be possible for CNN to adapt to the digital world and still be profitable and widely viewed. But I'm not positive.
I guess the other question out of this, though, is you look now zooming out as an observer, the business model for journalism, like the rest of media, has really been under threat, constant change. Is there anyone out there, or is there any model out there that you look at and see that gives you maybe cause for hope? Because there's so much despair right now. Oh, this
Mhm.
is broken, that's broken. Cable fees are down, as you said. But I'm looking more broadly, looking at the whole landscape. Is there anything that gives you a ray of hope?
Other than a white knight riding in on a big horse, I'm not sure. Um, it's the days of the dominance or the pervasive viewership of CNN and networks like it may be over because but I know my own children are in their 30s. They're not cable subscribers, but they know they have access to all the news they could ever want
Mhm.
online, and it's just a million different sources for them. We went in the cable business. I'm sure you remember in the early days, people were talking about how we had 500 channels and who would
Right.
be able to watch it. Well, 500 channels is a pittance compared to what's going on now, and how any one uh, service can get a commanding position is it's difficult. So the business model has to change. Obviously, the scale has to be smaller, and I think if the scale is smaller, it's difficult to provide the kind of coverage that we attempted to provide at CNN.
Well, one last quick thing on that. You mentioned the 500 channels. I think there are some out there are looking at the digital universe, places like Substack and others, and wondering, is there an will bundling come back in some fashion? Is there some theory where your children in their 30s, here are the 50 Substacks and YouTube channels that I like, and there might be some way to create a bundle the way Comcast and all the other cable operators did. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if the right properties were in the bundle and it had and those properties had were widely attractive to people, it's certainly possible. Um, but the question is, who's the bundler?
Right,
Do you need a big company to be the bundler?
right.
And I don't know. I really don't, and I'm going to have to leave the answer to those questions to people younger than me at this point.
Steve, when Ted does pass, how do you hope he is remembered? Not by those of us who worked with him or for him,
Mhm.
but maybe your kids, so to speak. How will he be remembered in history, you think? And how do you hope he's remembered?
I hope he's remembered as a genius with great vision and a pretty pure heart in terms of what he was trying to accomplish. And it's not just his purely business uh, achievements, which are phenomenal, um, but his philanthropy and his environmental stance. And I have a little card that he gave me the last time I saw him at lunch about a year and a half, maybe ago. And it's his 11 voluntary initiatives. I don't know if you've seen it, but they're all things that I know you would agree with about protecting the earth and eliminating war and stuff. He feels those things deeply, and he's lived them. You know, I'll never forget. I was in my car and I was on 285 in Atlanta, and I'm driving along. The phone rings, and it was Tom Johnson, and he says to me, "Do you know anything about Ted donating?" And I'll say blank to the UN. I said, "No, but it's just $1 million. So what?" He said, "No, I didn't say $1 million. I said $1 billion." I almost drove off the road, you know. But that that kind of willingness to share your resources to try to make the world better is should be at the heart of what I hope Ted is remembered for. I really do. I mean, you could list his business achievements and they will stand up to anyone else's in the history of the United States. But he has this added element of wanting to do good and putting his money where his mouth is.
That's fabulous. Great place to wrap things up. I want to thank you again, Steve, for taking the time with us today and sharing your insights about TED, about the evolution of CNN, the business, the landscape, and frankly, what the future may hold. So thank you for that. And I want to say thanks to all of those you out there who are watching this and listening to Breaking the News Deep Cut Conversations. If this discussion struck a chord, we hope you will share it. We're also inviting you to help us bring our documentary podcast fully to life. This is an independent project built on deep reporting, archival research, and interviews like this one. It's about examining how the modern news ecosystem was built, where it fractured, and what's at stake now. Your support makes that possible. You'll find a link below to learn more about and to contribute, if you like, to our fundraising campaign. Every donation is tax deductible, and it will help us create the series and bring the story to college campuses and public forums across the country. In the weeks ahead, we'll release additional deep cut conversations, each one designed to illuminate another part of the story. We'll see you next time.